Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jay, just Jay, and today we're going to discuss what goes into producing a radio show and or podcast. And if we're going to discuss what goes into producing a radio show and or podcast, the only logical place to begin would be with the Christmas classic, A Christmas Story. A Christmas Story is a movie about a young boy on a quest to receive a BB gun from Santa Claus. In the movie, there's a scene where his father wins a major reward, and it's a large lamp shaped like a lady's leg in a fishnet stocking. 9-year-old Ralphie, our main character, cannot help but to ogle the ostentatious object that sits in the window, and the narrator informs us that there's only one thing in the world that could have dragged Ralphie away from the soft glow of electric sex gleaming in the window, and that something was Little Orphan Annie, his favorite radio show. That's right, radio. There was once a time where radio was the hotness and people would sit around the radio together to listen to their favorite shows together. Then television came along and changed the whole game, and radio's popularity began to wane. #bars. But just like any fad, it retracts before impact. And now on Spotify alone, there are over 5 million podcasts available with 32.5 million listeners a month. Odds are that today alone, you might have learned a new detail about a grisly murder, or listened to a couple of strangers describe a show that you've already watched, or perhaps took a second to allow yourself to be transported to some fictional world. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone that doesn't tune into what is essentially streaming radio on a regular basis, but few people ever consider what goes into producing a show. And today, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. What does go into producing a radio show or podcast? We're going to talk about what you need to do before you ever hit the record button, what you need to actually record, and what to do once you hit stop. Now, as we go through this presentation, I want you to keep a very close eye out and pay attention, see if you can find my cleverly hidden, reoccurring theme. And now, with that, let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, they say that if you fail to plan, you have already planned to fail. And that is exactly why I want to take a moment out and talk to you about Animal Crossing. You see, in the spring of 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, over 11 million people purchased Animal Crossing for their Nintendo Switches. Now, most people abandoned the video game after a sense of normalcy returned to the world, and these days, the average concurrent player base is less than 500,000 people at a time. I tell you that to tell you this. I am one of those 500,000 people. I am one of those 500,000 people because I am in the fortunate position to be able to record and engineer radio shows and podcasts for people. I am also one of those 500,000 people because while I am fortunate in that, I am unfortunate in the fact that I have to occasionally produce radio shows and podcasts for people who are completely and utterly unprepared. Let me tell you something. Nobody wants to hear aimless babble. There are few things that make a show more unlistenable than unprepared hosts. Nobody wants to hear aimless babble. Not your listeners, who won't be your listeners for very long. Not your co-host, though they usually won't say anything. And certainly not your engineer, and that's why he takes the time to keep his Animal Crossing island nice and tidy while he pretends to listen to you ramble. Now, what makes this rambling particularly annoying is that it is incredibly easy to avoid if you just take 5 to 10 minutes on the front end and make a plan. Now, I can't cover everything you should consider while making your plan, but I can give you a couple of things to think about. And let's start with the obvious. What are you going to talk about? And the incredibly important and often overlooked follow-up question, why are you going to talk about it? It seems obvious, but more people than you think believe that they have the wit, charm, and charisma to get on a microphone and just wing it. Pro tip, you do not have the wit, charm, and charisma to get on a microphone and just wing it. Next, are your takes on the topic original or unique in any way? Do you have a perspective that makes your thoughts particularly pertinent? If the answer to these questions is no, then you may want to go back to the drawing board and find another topic, because here's another pro tip for you. There's plenty of people babbling about celebrity gossip already. We don't need any more. Now, this next point isn't as obvious as the last two, but it's equally as important. What roles will you and your co-host play in the conversation? I'm not saying script out your talk verbatim or create some sort of persona, but make a plan. I've watched many shows go off the rails because everybody wants to be the cool star with the hot take, and the whole show just winds up deteriorating into a messed up game of I get the last word. No, I get the last word. Let me tell you something. Nobody wins that game. Make a plan with your co-host. Now, like I said, there was no way to cover every possible consideration that you could possibly consider here, he said redundantly, but equipped with these tips that I have just given you when it comes to planning a conversation, you now know just enough to be dangerous. Good for you. Yay! Next, we're going to talk about what you need to actually record your incredibly well planned out conversation. And this part can be understandably intimidating. The options for both hardware and software are seemingly infinite, and you just don't know what you don't know when you're starting out. But don't you worry your pretty little heads, your Uncle Jables is here to help you. I'm going to give you a small introduction into recording equipment and hopefully remove a little bit of that intimidation. Now, before we begin, I encourage you all to hit pause right now and take 5 to 10 minutes to do a cursory Google search for recording equipment, and so you can have some kind of an idea of what we're going to talk about. I'll wait. To those of you that hit pause, welcome back. Do you see what I mean? There is a lot of options. And to the majority of you that did not hit pause, I hope that silence was just as awkward for you as it was for me. Now let's get back on track and dive into recording hardware. A lot of people overthink their equipment. While it would be great to have the same recording capabilities of an Ardent Studios, it just isn't necessary. We're just recording talk here, man, and as many punk rock aficionados can tell you, you can do a whole lot with very little. Now, what we're going to use for an example is the exact setup I'm recording this speech on right now. First thing we're going to need is microphones. I'm currently using a Shure SM58, which retails for $99. It is a basic, no-nonsense microphone. I've had this mic for nearly a decade, and it's been dropped, tossed in bags, had spills on it. You name it, I've done it, and this thing is still going. There's a reason this thing has been a standard house mic in small venues for decades. The thing is a trooper, and it is inexpensive. $99, you're off and running. Next, we're going to need something to let our microphone talk to our computer, and that is where you're going to hit your interface or your external sound card. Now, I am currently using a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 that can accommodate 2 inputs. Those would be your microphones, and it retails for about $160. Now, just like with the microphones, it's stripped down and to the point. Most people think that they need a huge mixer with all sorts of knobs and sliders, and that's because they want to mess with every level imaginable, but that's just not what you want. It's actually the opposite of what you want. What you really want is just a good, clean vocal recording. If you mess with the funky level on the front end and send that recording with the funky level into your computer, you are stuck with that funky level, Bootsy. But if you record a good, clean recording and send it in your computer and apply a funky level there and you don't like it, well, you can Control-Z, Taylor. Simple as that. The key to remember here is that simplicity is king. I'm throwing a couple of chords, and that's basically it. 2 mics, 1 interface, couple of XLR cords that'll run you about $15 a piece, and you're ready to record for just under $400. Now, look, I am aware that $400 is still pretty expensive, and that can be a pretty good barrier to entry for a lot of people. But luckily, while you're saving up, you already have a fairly decent setup on you right now. You know that funky little rectangle that contains the entirety of human knowledge? Yeah, that's in your pocket or on your desk, or for some of you, it's in your face right now while you lie to yourself that you can do 2 things at once. It's actually a pretty competent creation tool. There are no shortage of recording apps available, and the microphone on our phones these days are capable of recording some remarkably good audio given the right conditions. The moral of the story here is this: do not be intimidated. If you just take a little time and do a little research, you will be able to find an affordable setup that works for your needs. Of course, now that you have the hardware to record with, you need the software to record to. And much like with apps for your funky rectangles, there is no shortage of free programs that are more than equipped to handle basic recording. So, rather than focus on what program you should try, we're going to move right along to what you'll be doing with your chosen program. And this brings us to back-end production or post-production. This is arguably the most important step, and it is easily the most skipped. See, taking time to clean up your recording gets overlooked for three main reasons. 1, people just don't know what they don't know. 2, people are overwhelmed by the options at their disposal. Or 3, people are just plain lazy. Now, we can't fix lazy, but we can do something about ignorance. So open your ears, boys and girls. It's listening time! First, let's discuss why taking some time to clean your recording is always time well spent. Throughout this presentation, you've been hearing my voice after it was passed through a simple EQ and compressor that I have saved on my computer. I've done nothing to the settings, I just applied the preset and kept it trucking. It doesn't sound like anything special, does it? And that's the point. It shouldn't sound special. It should just sound clean and audible. 2 characteristics that vanish very quickly when I turn this EQ and compression off. Watch. He clicked a button. Now, if you hear this and you think to yourself, wow, that sounds great, or, well, gee, I don't even really see the difference, then please, for the love of all that is holy in this world, do not engineer any form of audio for any reason whatsoever. If your puppy's life was on the line and the only way to save it would be for you to release an hour of audio, please know that you were always going to outlive Fido anyhow, so it's okay. Let it go. Now, if that took you down a wrong, dark path, I apologize, because look, I understand that a puppy's passing is no pleasant ponderance, but it's more enjoyable than this muddy mess we're listening to right now, so let's return to normal. Clicks button. There we go. Now, between a fictional dead dog and some awesome alliteration, the reason for taking time to mix your audio should be clear. But where do we begin? Well, we begin at the beginning. Duh. Step 1, learn what an EQ is and use it. For our purposes, we'll keep it really simple. The EQ is what makes your voice clear and punchy. Step 2, learn what compressor is and use it. Now, according to Compression for Dummies, the compressor is what makes your volume uniform. The book was admittedly fake, but the definition was real. Now, for my money, the single best place to learn the basics of audio engineering outside of in-person instruction with a professional is YouTube. There are countless video tutorials available to help you get started, and while none of these videos will make you an expert immediately, they can get you pointed in the right direction. It is inexcusable not to take time to make your vocals sound good, especially when you know that watching a simple, short 5 to 10 minute video will give you enough information to be dangerous. One tip I will give you right now is that the process only has to suck one time. I mentioned my preset earlier. Make you one of those. Take an hour or so and fine-tune things to your liking and save that setting as a preset. Going forward, all you got to do is apply that preset and maybe do a little fine-tuning, and that's about it. There are even some programs that have inbuilt presets. Now, while I would never recommend using a factory preset and calling it a day, I will say that they can be very helpful when you're trying to find a starting point and figure out what you're learning. Now, before we move on, let me reiterate one more time that taking time to mix your show properly is crucial. Why would you take the time to plan a well-thought-out show, record on top-notch equipment, just to have it come out sounding like you recorded it with 86 blankets between you and the microphone? It makes no sense. Past that, I mean, that's it. That's the back of the book for recording a radio show or podcast. I suppose that I now deem you equipped to go forth and become the next Howard Stern or some reference that the young people will understand. But before you head out to go build your media empire, let's take a moment and recap what we've discussed today. Producing a radio show or podcast can be broken down into 3 basic steps. 1, planning your show. Mapping out your show so it doesn't deteriorate into an hour of pointless rambling and unoriginal talking points. 2, record your show. Make sure you have the proper equipment. Having an incredibly thoughtful and well-planned show is pointless if you can't actually record it. 3, mix your show. Learn how to do a basic mix. The best show in the world will be rendered unlistenable simply because it is sonically unpleasing. And it really can be that simple. 1, 2, 3. And that's it. That's it, assuming that you caught on to my cleverly hidden reoccurring theme that I told you to keep an eye out at the beginning of this presentation. Now, I've heard it said many times in my life that you should always begin with the ending in mind, and that's good and all, but I much prefer the more straightforward phrase, taking 5 to 10 minutes on the front will save you hours on the back. Plan your show properly, and the conversation will flow much, much easier, allowing you to focus on the recording. Get a good clean recording and mixing becomes immensely easier, and you get a good mix and you can fake it till you make it, son, and have folks thinking you've been a pro for years. And now that, ladies and gentlemen, that is officially it. Now, let's move on to my final slide with the witty ending on it. With that, I say adieu. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Jay, just Jay, and you have been educated. I hope you learned something. I thank you for your time. I hope you have the best day ever. The end.